50 Cent just went full commentary mode on Keefe D's narrative shift, and the entire dynamic of who's telling the truth in this Tupac saga just got infinitely messier. For months, Keefe D has been front and center with a story that Diddy masterminded Tupac's death, allegations that became the centerpiece of a murder case that finally got traction after nearly 3 decades. Then suddenly, the details started looking suspiciously convenient for Diddy's legal defense, and 50 Cent wasn't about to let that slide without publicly torching the credibility of it all. The core issue here is simple. Keefe D initially claimed Diddy paid him and his associates to take out Tupac during the height of East Coast-West Coast beef. That story led to his arrest, federal charges, and what should have been a straightforward legal pathway. But as Diddy's own legal team started building their defense against sex trafficking and racketeering charges, suddenly Keefe D's testimony became a liability that needed softening. 50 Cent, who's been watching Diddy's empire crumble with the kind of intensity usually reserved for sports rivalries, immediately saw what was happening and decided to make it very public that Keefe D's credibility was evaporating in real time. The specific moment that triggered 50's response was Keefe D suggesting in recent statements that maybe, just maybe, Diddy didn't actually order the hit. That's not a subtle shift. That's a complete 180 for months of claiming the opposite to law enforcement. 50 posted about it directly, making it clear he thought the entire narrative was collapsing because Keefe D was either lying initially or lying now, and either way, his word on anything at this point was worthless. Post went viral immediately because it tapped into something people were already thinking. If Keefe D's been inconsistent on the Tupac angle, how reliable is he on anything else? What makes this particularly explosive is timing. Diddy's legal situation is genuinely dire. He's facing federal charges that go way beyond any single accusation. The trafficking allegations, the evidence from raids on his homes, the documented patterns of behavior, those are standalone problems for him. But if Keefe D's testimony about the Tupac murder was the thread holding together a narrative of decades-long criminal conspiracy, then, because physical evidence is nearly non-existent, if Keefe D's narrative keeps changing, the entire foundation of the case becomes questionable, regardless of how true any particular version might be. 50 S framing was particularly brutal because he wasn't just saying Keefe D was lying, he was suggesting the whole thing had become transparent theater. The observation was that once Diddy needed it to be true, that he didn't order the hit. Suddenly, that's exactly the narrative Keefe D decided to provide. It's the kind of pattern that doesn't require conspiracy theories to look absolutely damning. It just requires pattern recognition, which 50 made sure to broadcast to millions of people. Social media took this and ran with it in predictable directions. Diddy supporters jumped on 50's commentary as proof that the entire Keefe D case was fabricated, which isn't actually what 50 said, but nuance doesn't trend well. D decided to provide. It's the kind of pattern that doesn't require conspiracy theories to look absolutely damning. It just requires pattern recognition, which 50 made sure to broadcast to millions of people. Social media took this and ran with it in predictable directions. Diddy supporters jumped on 50's commentary as proof that the entire Keefe D case was fabricated, which isn't actually what 50 said, but nuance doesn't trend well. The thing nobody's really discussing is how much Keefe D's shifting statements might actually be revealing something true about the complexity of the case, rather than revealing dishonesty on his part. It's possible that Keefe D genuinely doesn't remember every detail clearly, or that his understanding of the chain of command and motivation has evolved. 30 years is a long time to hold a story perfectly. What's fascinating from a legal strategy perspective is that Diddy's team didn't have to engineer this themselves. They just had to wait for Keefe D's own testimony to become fragile and then exploit the fragility. And if 50 Cent's commentary accelerates the public perception that Keefe D isn't trustworthy, that's actually helpful to Diddy's defense, whether or not there's any coordination happening. The appearance of legal desperation sometimes works better than an actual legal strategy. The music industry response has been notably cautious. Nobody wants to touch this with significant commentary. Diddy has too many connections, too much history with too many people still working. But privately, there's legitimate concern about what happens if a case this high profile falls apart because a key witness became unreliable. It suggests that cases depending on aging witnesses and 30-year-old memories might be nearly impossible to prosecute successfully, which creates obvious problems for victims and their families who've been waiting for accountability. 50 Cent's intervention is interesting because he's not a neutral party. He has massive beef with Diddy that spans decades. Their feud is famous, documented, and well-established. So when he's making these observations, he's not pretending to be objective. He's openly commenting from a position of opposition. That actually makes his observations sharper in some ways. He has no investment in protecting Diddy or being diplomatic. He's simply pointing out that the story changed when the pressure changed, and inviting everyone to draw their own conclusions about what that means. The federal prosecutors involved in this case are in a genuinely difficult position. They thought they had a breakthrough in a cold case that's haunted the music industry and hip-hop culture for 3 decades. But the moment your key witness starts appearing inconsistent or unreliable, the entire prosecutorial advantage evaporates. They can't unring the bell of Keefe D's credibility problem. The defense will absolutely hammer on every inconsistency between his current statements and his earlier claims. Juries are trained to be skeptical of witnesses who change their stories, and Keefe D's story just became officially public as something that changed significantly. What's worth noting is that this doesn't necessarily mean the charges against Keefe D himself disappear. He could still face consequences for his alleged role in the actual shooting, regardless of whether Diddy ordered it. But the RICO-style conspiracy angle, the narrative of Diddy orchestrating a decades-long criminal enterprise that becomes much harder to prosecute if the centerpiece witness is unreliable about the most famous alleged act in that enterprise. 50's commentary also serves a deeper purpose for him personally. Every time he amplifies how messy Diddy's legal situation looks, he's essentially winning their long-running feud in the public consciousness. Diddy's dealing with federal charges, multiple accusers, raids, documented evidence. The empire that seemed untouchable a year ago looks deeply vulnerable. And 50 Cent gets to stand on the sidelines, making pointed observations about how it's falling apart. It's not the kind of victory that requires him to do anything directly. It's the victory of watching someone else's empire crumble and then making sure everyone sees you noticing. The Tupac case itself remains genuinely unsolved in any way that matters. Yes, an arrest was made. Yes, there's a trial. But the credibility of the central narrative is now in serious question, and that's going to complicate everything that follows. Families involved in the Tupac tragedy are going to see this play out in real time, and they have every right to be frustrated that the case's momentum just got derailed by inconsistent witness testimony. If this trial falls apart because Keefe D's credibility is destroyed, we might be back to square one, an old murder with no clear path to accountability. The broader media coverage picked up on 50's angle immediately because it's the kind of thing that gets clicks and engagement. Legal drama, celebrity feuds, unsolved murders, and credibility meltdowns. That's the content ecosystem firing on all cylinders. But underneath the engagement metrics, there's a real question about whether justice can be served when the key witness is unreliable. The case is decades old, and the defendant has resources to attack credibility in ways that might not require proving anything, except inconsistency. Industry insiders who've been following Diddy's trajectory know that legal troubles of this magnitude usually end one of 2 ways. He either gets convicted on serious charges and effectively disappears from public life. He beats the charges through legal maneuvering and claims vindication. The Tupac angle was supposed to be the narrative that locked everything together. The proof that Diddy was capable of ordering violence, that he had motive, that he had a history of operating outside the law. If that narrative collapses, the remaining charges look less like evidence of systematic criminality and more like isolated incidents. That's huge from a legal strategy perspective. 50 Cent's willingness to be the public voice, making these observations, is also strategic in a different way. He's establishing himself as someone who can call out bullshit and has credibility in analyzing what's actually happening. He's not a lawyer, but he's been in the industry long enough to know how these narratives get constructed and deconstructed. His commentary carries weight because he's not pretending to be neutral or objective, he's just reading the situation accurately. The question now is whether Keefe D's testimony becomes completely unusable in court, or whether prosecutors can rehabilitate it enough to make it still viable. That's going to depend on how effectively his defense team can undermine it and how skillfully prosecutors can explain the inconsistencies. In a case this visible, with this much public commentary already circulating, jury selection becomes absolutely critical. Finding jurors who haven't already made up their minds based on 50 Cent's viral posts is going to be nearly impossible. What's clear is that the momentum has shifted. A few weeks ago, the narrative was, cold case finally solved, decades of mystery answered, Tupac's killer identified. Now the narrative is, witness credibility in question. Prosecution's case looks shaky, entire prosecution strategy under pressure. That's not a small shift. That's the difference between a strong case and a vulnerable one. 50 Cent's role in accelerating this public shift in perception shouldn't be underestimated. He has millions of followers, significant platform power, and zero reluctance to use it. When he posts about something like this, it doesn't just disappear into the social media void. It becomes part of the larger conversation about what's actually happening. His commentary on Keefe D's credibility problems becomes something that potential jurors have heard, that journalists reference, that shapes how people understand the case. The ultimate irony is that if Diddy's defense team is helped by 50 Cent's commentary, it's entirely accidental from 50's perspective. He's not defending Diddy. He's attacking Keefe D, and by extension, the entire narrative that's been built around the Tupac case. But the effect is the same. Reasonable doubt gets introduced, credibility gets questioned, and the prosecution's case gets weaker. From here, we're waiting on trial developments, on how prosecutors handle Keefe D's testimony, on whether any other evidence can compensate for witness unreliability. But the conversation has fundamentally changed. What was supposed to be a triumphant moment for law enforcement, finally solving one of hip-hop's most famous unsolved murders, has become a complicated legal battle where the star witness looks compromised, the narrative keeps shifting, and the entire trajectory of the case is uncertain.